Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about the new moon that's coming up this weekend. It's a pretty dynamic new moon, and that will be a Pisces new moon, of course. And let's go ahead and look at the chart. So here we are with the chart. And as usual, we're displaying this chart. This is an artificial rising of the natural houses, Aries, Taurus, Gemini being the cusp of the first, second, and third house, like we do. And one thing I wanted to mention right away is that you will see Neptune appearing in the first house here, even though Neptune is 27 degrees of Pisces, and that's because we have a 3-degree rule that we use. This is optional, of course, in the software. And just to mention that that's why you see it as a first house item, because it really is close enough to the ascendant, whatever house system we're using. And then there's actually an option in case of whole sign houses too. We want to apply that to whole sign houses because some people do and some people don't. But it does turn out to be effective in terms of the fact that it is a house instead of just being just a sign, even though that's the cusp of the house is 0. So we make that option available too. And of course, in Pisces, in the sign preceding Aries, the sign of kind of more mystical side of things, endings in some cases, or confinement or isolation, we do have 20-degree mark, the sun and moon, and it does, of course, make an angle again to Uranus, which is 1953 of Taurus. So we still have Uranus in the picture here. Another thing that we're going to want not to forget about mentioning is the fact that we also have Mercury at 0 degrees of Aries, which is right on this ascendant, and therefore square to the 1 degree, I'm sorry, it's not square, it's sextile to the 1 degree mark where Pluto resides. So we have a Pluto-Mercury situation going on here. We also have the North Node pretty close to Chiron, although that was closer last cycle. It's now beginning to fade away. But the North Node in Chiron, I think, is very appropriate too, because there is a painful situation that we're having to deal with in the whole world right now. We're in kind of dark times, and it's difficult. And as you all know, there's so many conflicts and situations that it's hard to know how to handle it and how you stand on it. And that's something I think we need to talk about a little bit, is how we do our assumptions, how we as a culture even come together and do things, and what we're trying to accomplish. And Einstein said that when you're in a problem, you cannot solve the problem using the same assumptions that got you into it. Basically, you have to change your thinking, change your paradigm of way of doing things. And I think that really applies to the culture right now. It also applies to each one of us individually. There may be a pattern that you're stuck in. And with outer planets, you really have to be open to, this applies also to the Uranus, the powerful Uranus that we have going right now, because the moon, not the moon, but Mars, is at 20 degrees of Aquarius. So that is square to Uranus. The most simplistic thing you could say is accidents. You could say surprise events, things not going the way you expect. You could say surprise enlightenment as well, because, I love to say about Uranus, and I've said it so many times before, but the Grateful Dead line, once in a while you can get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And there is always the possibility with Mars and Uranus, with powerful Uranus, with Sun and Moon and with Uranus, that things might go south, but you can always get something out of it. And a lot of times we waste our time worrying and fretting about what's already happened, and the recipe there is, if it's something you can't change, you might as well accept it and just call it that's what it is, and loving what is. And therefore, because if something happens with all these outer planets, that's the case, that with Pluto transits as well, if something happens and we could fight it, or we could just say, this is what's happened, is there a lesson here? This is what's happened, how can I make the best of it? This is what's happened, and maybe it was for the best. Maybe there's a way that I didn't really prosper in that job emotionally, let's say. I was getting so much money, but it wasn't the fit. And when it did go, maybe you got fired or something, that could be the worst day of your life as it happens. And then 10 years later, you could look back on it and say, yeah, that was the best day of my life. So, it's all perspective and how you see things, which brings up again this Mercury with Pluto, sometimes called in a natal chart a detective aspect. But basically, it's the idea that we do have ways to change our thought process, change our assumptions, look at things a different way, and have a chance to prosper from what the universe has provided for whatever reason, even though it might be difficult. So that's all the outer planets have this. And of course, we have also Neptune right now at the tail end of Pisces with Mercury. We have Mercury with Pluto. And we have Mars with a strong position, a strong square to Uranus. So we have a lot of outer planet stuff going on, and it is time to try to make the best of situations and try to see how the culture might be able to transform. And that starts with individuals. So we're all kind of caught up in this soup that we're in, and we can swim around it and then try to be effective as much as we can instead of just boiling without being able to do anything. So I think that's what's going on in this very dynamic new moon here. And I did want to bring in another thing with this Neptune. By the way, I can show you to keep Neptune on the 3-degree rule, there's an option under the preferences, TimePassages, display options. And here we can make it actually 0. So, you can see that way it shows up back in Pisces, takes that away. And as you can see also in these display options, I could put it back to 3 because I do like 3. You can apply it or not to whole sign houses just in case you want to go the other way with that. So, just want to show you that works. So, the fact that we have so much Neptune right now is also echoed in the first quarter moon a week from now. And I have that chart up here to show you as well. So that's March 16th, Gemini, 27 Gemini. Well, 27 Pisces is the sun. So that is a case where it really is very strong, the connection that Neptune has, not so much with Mercury anymore, but with the sun and moon. So, and you know that the first quarter, Rudyard called it a crisis in action. It's like you start out going ahead with a new moon impulse, which might be to build your house, or it might be to make your project. And then that first quarter, you kind of run into the snag of the reality. How does the thing really develop, or what does it run into in the real world situation? And in this case, that kind of snag might have to do with perception, might have to do with deception, might have to do with misunderstanding which way you were actually headed in some way or another, might have to do with a more spiritual approach. Neptune is really not of this world, of this 3D world. It is beyond. And it connects us to the soul level in many ways, to departed souls. At 1850, Neptune was discovered, and that was the rise of actual communication with those who had passed, the whole spiritualist movement. So it's very interesting times, this cycle, this new moon cycle, including that first quarter moon, just something to think about. So let's see, what else did we have going here? There is one thing I want to mention about these new planets, speaking of spirit. This is Haumea, this is Makemake. Haumea represents, this is the glyph that I devised for it. It's kind of a variation of the Pluto glyph. These are all close to the Pluto orbit. The orbital period is a little bit larger than Pluto, but they're both very similar orbital periods. 284 for Haumea and 309 for Makemake. So they're pretty close together, and they do seem to have very similar meanings in terms of profound connection to nature. I'm really clear on that now. I've been doing so much research on it. And it is also a connection to natural law. It's a connection to right action, right relationship, truth-telling. I see it all the time with people and say, "Oh, you're a truth teller," and they say yes, when it's powerfully placed, you know. And it's been square to Pluto for a long time. Haumea has. Even when it was at the 29-degree mark of Libra, you know, also Pluto was at the 29-degree mark of Capricorn. So they've been in the square for a year now, since a year from last month, since February of 2023. They have, and at that time the new moons were even aligned with it. You know, we had that 0 degrees of Aries new moon, then we had a 29-degree of Aries new moon, which also aspected these two. And that's been prominent. I believe that thinking of it as right action and truth-telling, I think truth has been on trial in so many different ways. You know, we had a long time ago that Dominion lawsuit. They had to pay damages for consciously, willfully lying about the voting machines. You know, they knew privately that that was not true, but they still put it out there that there was some kind of problems. So anyway, well, that's a really interesting that's in the zeitgeist, and of course it is featured now in this new moon as well, because we do have that Mercury position, which makes an aspect, you know, 0 degrees, so it makes an aspect to both Haumea and to Pluto, as we were talking about. And not only that, not only is Haumea emphasized right now, but so is Maki. In the last full moon, it was a very close, exact yod from Saturn and Neptune. And of course, they've both moved on a bit, and Neptune faster. Neptune is actually 3 degrees off now, almost 3 degrees. But, you know, Saturn's at 11, this is 10:10. It's still the yod, really, from Saturn and Jupiter, which have to do with the society, to Maki, which has to do with activism, as well as this profound connection to nature. And this glyph represents a birdman, and the culture of Easter Island, they did have a birdman that was selected every year from the first egg of the season being brought back by a young champion to the festival that was gathered there. So this represents a birdman. It's also another variation on the Pluto chalice. And this was suggested by astrologer Philip Sedgwick. He's the one that said, why not use this? And I said, yeah, that's good. I like that. So we don't want to forget, with this yod that's going on from the social planets, there is kind of an emphasis on these planets, on what's inside us, what can we say is really true for ourselves, including maybe there's an activist streak, have to do something about it. And there is environmental activism, more and more important. There is social activism, more and more important. There is those difficult situations around the world that we all know about, and the surprise situation in some cases, like all of a sudden Ukraine not getting the aid because of logjam, I guess, in the Congress and so on. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, that these are very prominent right now, and I think it is part of our situation, including, you know, very recently, the vice president, top government official in the Biden administration, said unequivocally that it was time to call for a ceasefire, at least 6 weeks, get the aid in and take care of people in Gaza, because that's a desperate situation there. So we'll see how that all unfolds, but it is very interesting to kind of see what's happening in the world right now. Now, one more thing I wanted to bring up, let's see, I wanted to talk about the spring equinox as well, in connection actually with Haumea, because if you look at the 21st, or I think it's the 20th, the spring equinox chart, and it really would be a spring in the northern hemisphere, and it's actually the fall time of the year. In the southern hemisphere, you could call it the Aries equinox, really. We have still, again, because the sun now moves to 0 degrees, that's the same 0 degree mark of Aries, so brings in Neptune, like we've been talking about, also even more emphasizes, and because look, the moon is also near the beginning of another fire sign at 3 degrees of Leo. So it does bring in, there's a T-square between Pluto, moon, and Haumea, and then with the sun being in that position that Mercury was in, so making a aspect as well. So this is part of our whole zeitgeist right now, these new planets having a factor like that. So I want to mention that. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to mention, too, in connection with the new moon, is that we do have an eclipse coming up. This is, we have the daylight time changing on Sunday also. So this new moon is at 1 a.m. PST, and 1 hour after the new moon, it'll be 1 a.m. PDT, because that's when we change the clock back at 2 a.m. And this is not an eclipse, but the full moon is, because it's close enough to the nodal axis. So I'll just show you that. In TimePassages, you can open what charts you had recently opened. So I have this one. And this is the full moon. So just to mention that this will be an eclipse, you can see that it's closer now to the nodal axis. And we'll talk about the full moon more when time comes. Now, interestingly, in this new moon also, if we don't count these new planets that are not standard planets, but if we just count the standard 10 planets, 7 from the ancient planets, plus Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we're looking at a cluster. And TimePassages software is the only software that identifies these chart patterns. It's pretty complicated code. Leading Pluto, meaning you start here, and then everything is within a trine. Everything is within all the way to or just as far as Gemini. So that's where all the planets are, except for these two. Of course, they don't count as far as the pattern goes. So, and the ruler of the ascendant, of course, would be Mars. So you get these patterns, including elements and stuff. It's such a good learning tool, what I've found over the years. So many people have told me this, because you can click on anything. The planet showing how that works, Venus in the 12th house, and also in Aquarius, in the sign. And then if you just click another way, you can see what Venus is like, just Venus. You can click on the aspect lines and see what that means. You can even click on the aspect lines in such a way, if it's a transiting biwheel, that you get the ruler. You can look at Mercury, for example, as the ruler of both the 3rd house and the 6th house, and you can get interpretation for each of those by a right click and then selecting, if you're looking at transit with Mercury transiting. With a transit to Mercury being transited. So it's just so much information. You can click on just Pisces. What's Pisces? What is the 12th house cusp? What's the 12th house? So, and you can click on each individual planet as what is that planet, just generally. So there's so much of a learning tool involved here that people have told me it's just as good as a basic course in astrology, just to say. So we like to push the software. Pardon me for doing a plug, but we do think it's a little bit of an unsung hero in the astrology software, because not everybody knows what all it does. There's a lot of good features to it. Big manual for it that you can get access to as well under the help. So anyway, that's it for the software. And I guess I just wanted to bring up that we're living in tough times. It really is difficult times. I guess I'll transition back. So just to say, these are tough times. And it does require discernment, because, it does require staying open. Because these outer planet transits, and there's a lot of it going on, both Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all involved in these transits right now. And it's that kind of shows the transformation that's happening in the whole society and in our individual lives as well. And of course, you can't always just go with whatever impulse you have, whatever Uranian impulse you might have. You have to use discernment, and you have to decide how that might be helpful. But what you really almost must do, I shouldn't say you must do it, but what really is probably the key is being able to take a look at it, whatever it might be, even though it's a hardship in your life, and say, I wonder what the lesson is. I wonder how this is meant. I wonder how the spiritual, how the universe as a spiritual force is playing out. And that can be so healing and so soothing, to just recognize that everything's got a point to it. There's a purpose here. And that's, it's the lesson of life. That's the lesson long experience with it, and it is more general than the denominational religions that have certain precepts that are a little bit out of date in this modern age, So I think it is good. We need new models of spirit to carry us forward in this time. And best of luck with all that. And see you again. Take care now.